Hi everyone. So in my next video, I noticed that I used the term rational, and I thought that I should take a slight detour from the video series to clarify what I mean by the word. Okay, so we should distinguish between what I call goal rationality and epistemic rationality on the other hand. Okay, goal rationality is what economists tend to mean when they say things like, when they say the word rational. In this context, we say things like, if you want X, then do Y. Or suppose that Z helps you get X better than Y helps you get X. Then we would say that it's rational to do Z before Y. Or if you want X and you can do Z rather than Y, we could say that if you want X and you can't do Z, then do Y, something like that, okay? Let's do an example to make things clear. So suppose you want to save $1,000 and you think that you might be able to save $100 a week. If you keep this up, you'll have $1,000 in 10 weeks. So here, X would equal to save $1,000, okay? And let's make Z save $100 a week for 10 weeks, right? Let's make Y equal to save $90 a week for 11 weeks and $10 in the 12th week. So you see, now that we've defined these variables, we can make all kinds of substitutions in those statements that we mentioned before. So we could say something like, if you want X, do Y. Or if you want X, do Z. Well, actually, let's go with if you want X, do Y. So if you want to save $1,000, save $90 a week for 11 weeks and $10 in the 12th week. All right. But now notice that Z gets you $1,000 sooner. All right. So that helps you save $1,000 better than Y helps you save $1,000. So if you want X, then you should save $100 a week for 10 weeks rather than save $90 a week for 11 weeks and $10 in the 12th week. You see, we could make all kinds of substitutions. And maybe you would go with Y because you suppose that, or you realize that if you do Z, you can't afford Netflix each month or something. So, if you want X and you can't do Z, do Y instead. Okay, if you want to save $1,000 and you can't save $100 for 10 weeks, then save $90 a week for 11 weeks and $10 in the 12th week. Okay, all of this reasoning is characteristic of goal rationality. So epistemic rationality is different. Philosophers tend to mean epistemic rationality when they use the word rational, but you need to determine this from context because someone could have any meaning in mind when they use the word. Okay, epistemology is a branch of philosophy, so that's where the epistemic part comes from. Okay, epistemology is concerned with questions and issues about knowledge, truth, justification, and belief. Okay, so you can interpret the word epistemology to mean the philosophical theory of knowledge, or just a theory of knowledge. I'll make an epistemology video series one day. So epistemic rationality is much more concerned with the justification of belief insofar as those beliefs are true. So finding reasons to believe statements on the basis of truth, that kind of thing. So let's do an example of epistemic rationality. Suppose you know that dogs are descended from wolves, and your neighbor, much to your envy, has a pet doggy. Okay, now what can you infer about your neighbor's dog other than the fact that it's cute and adorable? You can infer that it's descended from wolves, right? So one way to think of why this follows is in terms of Venn diagram. So this is a set of all dogs. All members in this set are descended from wolves. Your neighbor's dog is a member of this set. So let's say this dot here is the dog, and hence your neighbor's dog is descended from wolves. Okay, you can think of this set of all dogs as being kind of like a club with entry conditions. All right, and one of the conditions is that to be in the club, you need to be descended from a wolf. So anything that's in this club, if you know it's in this club, you know it's descended from a wolf, right? So that's one way to think of how that inference works. And we can think of the statement, hence your neighbor's dog is descended from wolves, as like the conclusion of an argument. So that's the conclusion, right? Now, is it rational to believe this conclusion? Well, yes, but that's not my point. My point is that this is an example of, this kind of rationality is epistemic rationality, right? It's not, perhaps it could be, but it's typically not goal rationality. Okay, so don't conflate goal rationality and epistemic rationality. Just understand how they are different. So people often debate about whether something is rational. This is common, but they can't make progress because they don't notice this distinction. So let's do an example of that. So right now, much of the world is under restrictions because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Excuse me. So let's take the statement, it's rational to assume that everyone has COVID-19. Now imagine that you know of two people who argue over whether this statement is true. All right, so one person argues that it is rational to believe the statement, okay? Because, or, they think the statement is true. Because if you assume that everyone has COVID-19, then this helps you reduce the risk of getting the virus. But the other person argues that the statement isn't true because it's not rational. And the reason they think it's not rational is because it's a false assumption. Some people don't have COVID-19. It's not rational to believe something which is false. That seems to make sense, all right? But so does the first person's point. The first person's point seems to make sense as well. They both seem correct. But how can they both be arguably correct when both deny what the other asserts? Okay, it seems that at least one of the following two claims must be wrong. So claim one is that they are both correct, okay? Claim two is that they deny what each other asserts. Okay, we have to decide which statement to reject. In other words, either they're not both correct, in which case at least one of them is wrong. Perhaps both of them are wrong, but we would know that at least one of them is wrong. That logically follows from them not both being correct. Or they don't deny what each other asserts, in which case there's confusion because they seem to think they're denying what each other asserts. And I should say now that they, from a quite literal sense, from a grammatical sense, do deny what each other asserts. But in a different sense, maybe they don't. And what sense do I have in mind? Well, I have in mind the difference between the literal semantics of a statement and what the person actually means to say. Okay, so for our purposes, we are more concerned with what the person means to say. So this is to do with conversational implication, and some of my videos in this series will be on conversational implication. Okay, sometimes we worry more about conversational implication, and sometimes we worry more about what a statement literally seems to mean. But back to the two statements, which one should we reject? Well, the answer is the latter. So in other words, they aren't denying each other's statements, even though they may think that they are. They're not denying each other's statements from the perspective of what they mean to say. Okay, the first person seems to have goal rationality in mind. Okay, whereas the second person seems to have epistemic rationality in mind. Okay, both of them are correct, arguably, in these different kinds of, in the context of these different kinds of rationality. All right, so if someone's primary goal was to avoid COVID-19, perhaps it's goal rational to assume that everyone has it. Okay, that assumption will keep you in good stead. It's characteristic of the hope for the best but plan for the worst kind of attitude, right? That attitude is a goal rational one, okay? But it's not epistemically rational to assume that everyone has COVID-19, okay? Because some people don't have COVID-19. We know that some people don't have it, all right? By the way, in logic, we take the word some to mean at least one. So there is at least one person that doesn't have COVID-19, okay? This confusion between these two speakers evaporates when we do some philosophical language analysis. Okay, so this enables us to interpret their assertions as follows. One person asserts that it's goal rational to assume everyone has COVID-19, and the other person asserts that it's not epistemically rational to assume everyone has COVID-19. Now, I know they didn't actually assert this, but remember, for our purposes, we're more interested in conversational implication rather than the literal meaning of their statements. So they didn't actually assert this, but this seems to be what they mean. So we can take some leeway in reinterpreting their statements, and you should always allow someone to clarify what they mean in a debate. Because in arguments, we're more concerned with what a person who presents an argument means to say, rather than what they might have literally said because they weren't careful with their choice of words, or they're unfamiliar with some conceptual distinctions, for example, the distinction between goal rationality and epistemic rationality. Okay, so this is called the principle of charity. So you always give an opponent the most charitable interpretation of their argument as possible. In other words, you interpret the strongest version of someone's arguments as possible. If you reject some weaker version, you may not actually be, or if you deal with some weaker version of an opponent's argument, you might not actually be dealing with their argument. And if you were, then they can just improve the argument to the stronger version that you didn't address. So anyways, back to our two arguers. One person seems to have in mind that it's not goal rational, that it's goal rational to assume that everyone has COVID-19, but the other person seems to have in mind that it's not epistemically rational to assume that everyone has COVID-19. So it's not just philosophical language analysis that allows us to make these interpretations. Obviously, we have intuitive understanding about an intuitive understanding about conversational implication and what people seem to have in mind and what motivates people. A bit of folk psychology is at play, but so is some philosophical language analysis. Okay. Now, these amended interpretations of what they originally asserted, if we look at them, okay, presumably both could agree with each statement. Okay. It's not inconsistent to hold both beliefs. Okay, so these two beliefs could positively cohere in the one belief system without clashing. One person could believe both statements, and this alone would not make their beliefs inconsistent. Okay, now we are not up to the logical fallacies part of this video series yet, but this example might serve as a nice example when I do cover the fallacy of equivocation. So I'll briefly mention it here. Basically, this fallacy comes about when a term in an argument is used several times, but the meaning of that term or that word changes, okay? And in order for the argument to be valid, the meaning of that word would have to stay consistent, okay? It's one of the sneakier fallacies to notice, but once you notice the change in meaning, it stands out. It becomes obvious after the fact. It's obvious in hindsight that the conclusion stands or remains unsupported, okay? And not only does it, when you notice the fallacy, not only do you realize that the conclusion is unsupported, you can also pinpoint exactly where it has gone wrong. You can say, oh, you see the word rational? Well, in all of the premises, the arguer has goal rationality in mind. But when the word rational appears in the conclusion, the arguer seems to have epistemic rationality in mind. So, that kind of picture is characteristic of the fallacy of equivocation. Sometimes you have this intuition, just a feeling that a conclusion doesn't quite follow from the premises in an argument, but you can't quite put your finger on why you feel this way. Well, if you get that feeling, it might be an example of the fallacy of equivocation. So check the argument again to see that all the terms are used with consistent meaning. That's just about it. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. And if you want to see more videos, subscribe to my channel. Bye for now.